Personal Experiences of S.O.Susag. Preaching on Worldliness. While conducting a revival meeting at Grand Forks, North Dakota, I preached one afternoon on the subject of worldliness. An attorney and his wife from Langdon, North Dakota, were staying in the city to attend the meeting. After hearing this sermon, the wife would not attend the services anymore. At the close of the Sunday afternoon service 2 days later, the attorney came to me and said, "The Holy Spirit was in the meeting this afternoon, wasn't he?" I replied that he was, and he continued, "Every sinner present was saved, and something happened to me that I never remember having experienced before. I cried like a child." I asked him why his wife had quit coming to the meeting. In reply, he asked, "Has Sister Hanson told you anything about us and our home?" I said, "Yes. You once gave a minister 2,200 pieces of money. They were all pennies. You did a good thing. This is all Sister Hanson ever told me about you folks. I have heard nothing whatever about you." He referred to the sermon on worldliness and said, "In your talk, you practically set a price on everything we have in the home, such as curtains, carpets, furniture, and the range, and you illustrated it this way. Supposing a person could buy a suitable range for $42.50, but seeing another just the same kind, only with nickel-plated trimmings, for $82, and he would choose the latter, wouldn't that be called the pride of the eye? And that is just the kind of range we have, and my wife could not see it that way. She thought that Sister Hanson had told me and did not get that out of her mind and was finally lost," the husband said. I was preaching under the leading of the Holy Spirit, and in what I said, I had no one in mind in using that illustration, but was simply trying to show that such money could be used to better purpose, and that sometimes when folks yielded to the temptation to take the finer appearing article, they might be going beyond their means. One Sunday morning, when I was a pastor in Grand Forks and had just gotten through preaching, a man came rushing up to the pulpit and said in a rough voice, "Who told you all about me?" I put out my hand and said, "My name is Susag. What is your name?" He answered, "You stood before this audience this morning and told them everything I have ever done." I answered, "Dear man, I don't know you, nor have I ever heard of you, and what is your name?" He looked around, and then he turned, and out he ran. I never saw the man again. Some years ago, when in Norway, Morris Johnson and I held a meeting on a large farm in Rollag, Meldal. A large crowd was out at the first service. We knelt down to pray, and while we were praying, I heard a great commotion, and when we rose from our knees, we found that 2/3 of the people were gone. The foreman of the King's Highway was in the audience, and he said that when he came out there, that those preachers were too fanatical, and if he had had his gun along and had shot them, he would have done the Lord a good favor. However, I do not think that in his heart he meant as bad as it sounded. For some time later, he invited us to his home and treated us with much courtesy and kindness. A number were saved and baptized, and quite a nice little congregation was raised up at that place. While we were at Sains, Norway, Brother Morris Johnson was very sick, and one evening when we arrived at our stopping place, he rolled onto his bed with his clothes on, exhausted. He had been bleeding from the lungs and was so weak that I could hardly get him home. We wept and prayed, and finally I said to him, "Morris, can't you get out of bed and kneel down with me and pray?" "I might," he said, "but I think the bed is the best place for me." However, he got down and said a few words and then rolled back into bed again. He wasn't able to undress all night, and I was afraid to go to sleep for fear that he might leave me most any time during the night. In the morning, he seemed to be somewhat rested, and I said to him, "Brother Morris, we must try and get down to Sister Sevenson's and get you some meat broth." Sister S. had a delicatessen store, and Morris hadn't eaten anything for a couple of days, but he said, "I am unable to get down there, nor can I eat anything." But I said, "You've got to get down there, even if I have to carry you there on my back. You'll have to eat, or I will be having to bury you somewhere among the rocks in Norway." He got up, and I put my arm around him, and as it would be, the road was downhill. We had to stop and rest several times, but we got there, and the Lord must have impressed Sister Sevenson, for she had some broth already made. But as she was preparing to serve it, the trouble in his lungs began again, and he went to the washroom. I fell prostrate on the floor, crying to God for help for him. Suddenly, I realized I had received faith for him and called to him, "Morris, the bleeding stops now." And it did. And from that time on, he recovered rapidly. When I think of that dear brother and the plight he was in, it brings tears to my eyes, even now.